Welcome to Chapter 2, Western Asia and Egypt. And so what you could see here is Mesopotamia is the first area we're going to talk about. Meso meaning between, and Potamus, the Greek for rivers. So obviously between those two rivers of the Tigris and Euphrates. And here you can see that area of Mesopotamia is called the Fertile Crescent. And obviously that's because many things back then did grow. Even though you can see the pictures in the middle, it looks a little deserty now. Back then it was a little bit more fruitful. So the geography in these areas had little rain, but the soil was good because of silt. Silt comes from the rivers that overflow, and the muck from the bottom of the rivers that's made of decaying materials overflows to the land. It was also water. It would also water the crops, fertilize, and water, obviously very good for farming. And it did not begin until people could control the water for irrigation. So farming was really good when there was irrigation. Otherwise, you would just kind of look for your food. Now, city-states is a way of using government and the way of breaking up large cities, and you could think of them as states. We'll be discussing this throughout history in Rome and Greece, and here they are in Mesopotamia. So the cities that expand in size and civilization and form governments are called city-states. Mesopotamia had Eridu, Ur, and Urk, to name a few. They had walls of brick mud. They invented the arch and dome. They were polytheistic and believed in many gods. They had temples, which were ziggurats. They were a stepped tower, which we will look at next. The gods and goddesses ruled the city, so that's a theocracy. Kings were divine. 3 social groups: the nobles, made up of the royals and the priests; the commoners, made up of the farmers, merchants, fishermen, and craftsmen; and finally the slaves. There have been slaves in every culture, and every culture has been a slave. So if you look at the next slide, you could see that the empires of ancient Mesopotamia, as the population grew, fighting began over resources. The Akkadians to the north, or Semitic people, became the first empire. It eventually fell, and Babylon, the south, with Hammurabi in command, came to power. So Hammurabi was a king that knew that he needed order, and so you could see that he wrote something called Hammurabi's Code, which you could see to the right. The ruler is remembered for his law code, a collection of 282 laws, which were similar to Israelite codes. The laws had penalty for criminal offenses that varied by social class. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, you pay for what you do, was a fundamental part of the law. It established duties of public officials, consumer protection laws. The largest section was on marriage and family, interestingly enough, and contracts had to be signed to be legal for marriage. Mesopotamia, or Babylon, was patriarchal, which means it's dominated by men. Example, a wife that neglected her house could be drowned. Nice. That would be terrible. Fathers were in charge. If a son had struck his father, he shall cut off his hand. Now, we were always going to be studying religion, especially first semester in world history, and this is where it begins, because these people are polytheistic, which means that if you look at all of those gods drawn down there in the cartoon style, those are some of the gods of this area. The importance of religion. Well, climate and disasters affected how people viewed the world. They would feel helpless to nature. Gods and goddesses gave them a way of control their surroundings. They had almost 3,000 gods to be obeyed and to be prayed to. The creativity of the Sumerians. The Sumerians are credited with inventing the oldest writing system called cuneiform, which dates back 3,000 years. Using a reed from a plant, wedge-shaped, they pressed it into clay tablets, which of course were wet and then dried. This was for record keeping. Scribes were the men who would write. School to be a scribe went from sunrise to sunset. Technology of Sumerians, well, they had the wagon, the potter's wheel, the sundial, the arch, the bronze. They made bronze, and a number system based on 60. And so what you see here is that writing system. So you can see how it basically is pressed into clay and to make these shapes, and down below is my name. So you can imagine figuring out your name within that list. Now we're going to get to Egyptian civilization, and I'm sure you've looked at this culture before. It's pretty popular to look at. One of the things that's unique is the difference between Lower Egypt, which is to the north, and Upper Egypt, which is actually to the south. But the Nile is a unique river that actually flows from south to north. Most rivers flow from north to south, just like the Mississippi does here in the United States, but this one's unique. So the main geographical element of Egypt was the Nile River, and that green area at the top of that map by Lower Egypt is called the Delta, or the Nile River Delta. It is the longest river in the world. Where the Nile flows into the Mediterranean Sea is called the Delta, as I stated, an area known as Lower Egypt. Upstream, it is called Upper Egypt. They grew food, it was made faster travel, and it was a barrier against invasion. Not going to float a horse across that. So again, looking at religion, the Egyptians are polytheistic, and you could see there are many gods here. I'm not going to list all of them, but they also believed in reincarnation, which is why they had such elaborate burial ceremonies for the pharaohs and the higher officials. And so again, please look at those many, many lists of God there. Okay, going on to some of their history, you guys can see what's called a timeline. A timeline is a way of looking at history briefly as a linear way. And you could see the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. Those are the three main kingdoms, and you could see what happened during which of those kingdoms. So the Old Kingdom, 500 years long, age of prosperity, term pharaoh became common. God, king, yes, their kings were also considered gods. Government became a bureaucracy, an administrative organization, 42 provinces, and the pyramids were built. And remember, those pyramids are tombs. The Middle Kingdom, 398 years long, golden age of stability. Anytime we use the term golden, that means it's awesome and really good. Nubia, an area of Africa, was conquered. Pharaoh is a shepherd that provided public works. Egypt invaded by the Hyksos using horse-drawn chariots. So the New Kingdom comes along, 482 years, drove out the Hyksos, became powerful in Southwest Asia, built new temple for Hatshepsut, who was the first woman ruler, and Amenhotep IV. The worship of Aten, the god of the sun disk, as one god, changed his name to Akhenaten. Destroyed temples, and you all know King Tut, because if you ever make it down to the what is it called? Down to the Luxor, you might see some of his stuff. So on this, we can see an average. You remember, this is when during the Old Kingdom, what a typical pyramid would look like. Pyramids are fascinating because they're still there. And mummification is fascinating because it's just a way of seeing dead bodies that are thousands of years old. They were built for the pharaohs and his family in the Old Kingdom. It gave him supplies for that life he was about to move on to because of reincarnation: chairs, boats, chests, weapons, games. And then that spiritual body could continue. Mummies are a way of embalming and making that body go on. So if you look at this, this is how society is stacked. Daily life in ancient Egypt. They married young. They didn't live as long, so they needed to marry young. Girls were 12, boys were 14. Mostly monogamous, meaning they only had one partner in life, unless first wife was childless, husbands in charge, but wives were pretty respected. Women could hold to their inheritance and become priestesses and queens. Parents arranged the marriage, and sons carried on the name. But divorce did exist. So writing and education were done in hieroglyphics. So you guys will see examples of hieroglyphics. Those, of course, are to the right, and those are considered to be pictures depicting what they wanted to say. So first in stone and then on papyrus, which is plant life that's woven together. And only boys were taught, well, typically boys were taught to write. You can see the achievement in arts and science, pyramids, temples, statues showed Egyptian talent and achievement. Math, calculate area and volume. Obviously, they had to be pretty good at geometry if they were making things like those gigantic pyramids. So now we're on to a different section, 3, new centers of civilization. And so we have looked at 2. Here is the role of nomadic people, pastoral nomads, people that would run around this area of the world. They overran settled communities, yet moved around to provide nourishment for their animals. Provided trade. They would carry things from these, set places from one to the other and do the trade. Indo-Europeans, Greeks, Latins, Persians, Sanskrit, and Germanic languages moved to Asia Minor and became the Hittite kingdom. First to make use of iron, stronger than bronze at the time, led to the strengthening of Syria and Palestine. Who are they? The Phoenicians. So there are the Phoenicians. They lived in Palestine along the Mediterranean Sea. Semitic speaking, great international traders, and they sailed as far as Britain and Africa's west coast, which of course back then would have been in a small boat, which would have been a little scary. They established Carthage, which is in North Africa, to be discussed again in Roman history, known for their alphabet of 22 characters, to the Greeks, and then the Romans, and then eventually to us. So you can see examples of languages. That's going to be a question down there. You will have to identify the difference between Hebrew writing, Phoenician writing, and Imperial Latin, as well as hieroglyphics and, of course, cuneiform. So the children of Israel, also Semitic speaking, their religion was Judaism. This is unique because it's one God. And so you can see all of these cultures we've looked at to this point had a God for the sun, a God for the water, a God for the earth, a God for everything. But this civilization did not. Their recorded history is the Torah. If you don't know what that is, it is the first 5 books of the Christian Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. From Mesopotamia to Palestine, Canaan. Due to drought, they went to Egypt and were enslaved until Moses led them out of Egypt. So you can see there they have the United Kingdom, the Divided Kingdom, and the spiritual dimensions of Israel. And so you could see that King Solomon had the United Kingdom, ruled over Palestine, and made Jerusalem the capital. He built the Temple of Jerusalem, which was destroyed, but you do see people at a piece of it called the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem to this day. The Divided Kingdom, after Solomon's death, Israel became 2 separate kingdoms, the north and the south. So in the north was Israel, 10 tribes, the capital of Samaria. They were invaded by Sumerians and scattered. And then the south was Judah, 2 tribes. See, these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and that's how they were divided up. Spiritual dimensions, Judaism has one God, Yahweh. Therefore, they're monotheistic. The covenant is a contract or promise. Law and prophets, teachers, did not need a priest to communicate with God. And in other religions in the Aryan time, here are the 10 commandments, which were the 10 commandments were what they received as a way to live their life. So you made it. We're on the final slide. This is section 4, the rise of new empires. And so you could see the Assyrian Empire and the Persian Empire. The Assyrian Empire, they were Semitic speaking. They fell to the Chaldeans and Medes. During the Assyrian rule, kings had absolute power, had network of communication, one of the world's first libraries, had a well-organized military, and used terror in warfare, destroying places, cutting off body parts, and burned people alive. If you look at that area right now, this, of course, is the part of the world where we are currently having big problems with those exact same problems. Destroying places, cutting off body parts, and burning people alive are what ISIS do. The Persian Empire, the Chaldeans, with King Nebuchadnezzar II, made Babylonia the center of the empire. It fell to the Persians, an Indo-European people from Iran, today's Iran. Cyrus came to power. He allowed Jews to return to Jerusalem, and he had a level of mercy. Okay, the structure of the Persian king, King Darius, strengthened the government with 20 provinces and well-maintained roads. And you can see the name of the provinces there. The fall of the Persian Empire, after Darius, kings became greedy, increased taxes, loyalty declined. Kings had many wives with many children, causing no clear line for the throne. And then you could see the Persian religion, which you can actually, the Zoroasters, you can look that up to this day and see pictures from it. So written down in the Zed Avesta, monotheistic, freedom of humans to choose good or evil. So that is the end of this section of your book.